everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Dr. Christian Jarrett. Christian, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to be speaking with you today, Christian. Why don't we get started by getting you to introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Well, my name's Christian Jarrett. My day job is I'm Deputy Editor of Psyche magazine, which is a global digital magazine that explores all aspects of the human condition. And I have a new book out called Be Who You Want, Unlocking the Science of Personality Change.
And that's what we're here to talk about. And I know everybody listening in on Sport, regular listeners at least, will know I'll be very excited to speak about this because it's personality science is a topic I tend to bring up every week in some shape or form, even if the guest has nothing to do with personality science at all. But it's so cool to have you on. And a few weeks ago, we had the legend himself, Professor Dan McAdams, on from Northwestern University, introducing us to his tripartite model of personality. And I've just loved going through your book so much, Christian. It's so informative, so it brings it to life, brings personality science to life, and it's so practical. And
thank you.
I'd love to know a little bit about the genesis of this book. Why a book on personality, Christian?
Oh, well, I've been covering psychology and neuroscience for the public for about 20 years now. Yep. And I guess one question that just has kept cropping up, people ask me, and it seems to be a debate, is just how much we are capable of change. And I suppose thinking about a book that I wanted to write for the public, I suppose the ultimate question became, well, can we actually change our very personalities? You know, how deep can change go? And then I suppose there's a slight personal angle as well. I think looking back over my life, there have been times where people have maybe, said to me that they've made assumptions about me, like, oh, you won't want to do this, Christian, or you won't want to go there, or they've implied I wouldn't be able to do things because of my personality or what have you. And I've never really liked being put in a box like that. And so again, it made me want to explore just, our capacity for change, I suppose, from a scientific perspective.
It so resonates with me because I think the beginnings of my interest in personality science very much stem from me kind of self-analyzing, I suppose, and reflecting on thinking about and reflecting on how my personality influenced my golf career and subsequently, how I function, not just with friends and family, but also as a sports psychologist out there in the world. So what you've just said really resonates with me. I mean, one of the things I've found is that personality science doesn't always come with the best press, if you like. There's, at least my interpretation, Christian, is it's been heavily criticised over the years. I mean, Dan McAdams and I talked about, its dip in form, if you like, throughout the 70s as it was heavily criticised. But what's your take on this? I mean, especially around the self-report testing, people talk about it being highly unreliable. What's your thoughts on the criticisms, and perhaps how would you respond to those critics?
Well, I suppose, I'm aware of, for example, tests like the Myers-Briggs test that gets used a lot in business, and that whole idea of sort of labeling your personality as a certain type.
Yeah.
And part of that actually is this notion that it's fixed, that you've got this kind of fixed type. And some people love that kind of thing. They love identifying with a particular personality type. But as I'm sure you know, the Myers-Briggs is not seen as scientifically valid or reliable. And so you've got this kind of murky world, I guess, of more pop psych quizzes and that kind of thing, which, I think has given the field maybe a poor reputation. And then there have been the arguments over, is it situations that really affect behavior, or is it our traits? And and that question, that I mentioned before, like, is personality fixed or does it keep changing? And then I think, unfortunately, when it receives coverage in the mainstream media, when some commentators have latched onto this idea that personality is malleable, that's then they've been then tempted to kind of go for the line of personality as a myth, as if there's no such thing as personality. That
Yeah.
there was, there was a podcast episode in America. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but the episode was called "The Personality Myth" or something like that. And it had quite
Right.
a lot of listeners, and so yeah, it's sort of extremes of argument one way or the other have I think plagued the field.
Yeah.
So my book, that's one of the things that it was a real challenge trying to convey this notion that personality is a useful, valid concept, and even self-report personality tests, they seem to be, in a predictive sense, very powerful. Whether it's work performance or health outcomes, and so on. So the challenge I had was trying to argue for the validity of personality as a concept, but then at the same time trying to make this case that it is not set in stone and that there's a thread of continuity, but there is the potential for change as well. And actually, we just change naturally as well to some extent as we get older, whether or not we deliberately intended that or not.
Well, you lay that notion out, all those notions out articulately throughout the book, and we'll be talking a little bit about, or mostly about, personality change, or how our personality can change, and we can do that deliberately. Just if I may, just you mentioned Myers-Briggs, and Myers-Briggs in sport isn't used so much, but the DISC personality profile is used quite a lot, and various other tests can be used, because I think sometimes the main personality test, the NEO, which gives us our measurement of personality, if you like, of the big five, isn't necessarily seen as probably practical or pragmatic enough for sport, or sporty enough. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what's your take on the Myers-Briggs, the DISC personality stuff? I know it measures types and not traits. Do you think there is some usefulness in them, or do you think, because of their lack of scientific validity, that you believe people should steer clear of them?
Well, to declare my hand, obviously, I grounded my book in the Big Five, so that's the way I chose
Yes.
to go. So I sort of
Yes.
immersed myself in personality science, and the overwhelming majority of research papers in the field use the Big Five and so on. And I'm not a practitioner myself, so I haven't had to deal with that challenge of working
Okay.
with, whether it's business people or sports people or what have you. And what I can, but I can relate to that challenge, and I can see as a tool that there might be more attractive ways to package up the kind of concept of personality. And if you can use a test like the Myers-Briggs or another one, if that's what it takes to get people thinking about their traits, and engaging in self-reflection, and maybe thinking about the team, how they differ from their teammates, or how they might complement each other in a way. It doesn't matter the questions of scientific validity and what have you, because the objectives are different, aren't they?
Yeah.
So that, I'm sympathetic to using it if it's a tool, in the moment, in at work or in sport, whatever it might be. I'm sympathetic to using it that way, really.
I think it's the age old consultant's problem of balancing out what's useful and practical as compared to what's scientifically
Yeah,
valid, and it's not an easy sweet spot to
yeah,
find. Now, look, let's come to your book here, and you mentioned grounding the book in the big five. It would be fantastic if you're able to give our audience a bit of an introduction to the big five. What are the big five? What do they comprise of? And maybe just a very, very brief definition of each trait.
yeah. Okay, so I'll try and zip through them. There's openness to experience, which is how willing you are, as the name suggests, to try out new things. It's also how aesthetically sensitive you are. It's related to creativity and intelligence, though it's not the same thing. But if you're a high scorer in openness to experience, you will tend to be more creative. Um, and have higher IQ. If you enjoy foreign movies, foreign language movies, and going to the opera, you're probably a high scorer in that trait.
Okay.
Conscientiousness, it's how ambitious you are, how self-disciplined, how orderly. If you're punctual, and you like dressing smart for work and that kind of thing, and you're well organized, you're probably a high scorer there. High scorers in conscientiousness tend to have engage in more healthy behaviors. That sort of goes with that trait. They're less likely to smoke, less likely to drink to excess, and that kind of thing. Then there's extroversion, introversion, which is very, very similar to how we refer to it in everyday life. Except I would add, in personality science, extroversion is also about sort of how active you are. So it's to do with energy levels as well. It's also to do with willingness to take risks and optimism. I mean, extroverts tend to be more optimistic. It's one of the things I think that draws them to being more active and engaged in the world, because they tend to expect better outcomes. Then there is trait agreeableness, which is how warm and friendly you are, but it's more than that. It's also how much you tend to trust other people and see the best in them. And then there's the final one of the big five is neuroticism, which is the opposite in a way of emotional resilience. So if you're a high scorer in trait neuroticism, you're prone to worry, you're prone to negative emotions like guilt and shame and what have you. And over the course of your lifetime, you're more likely to be diagnosed with mental health problems like anxiety and depression. And it's basically, whereas extroversion is about how much you experience positive emotions, neuroticism is more about how much you experience negative emotions.
I've always found that really interesting, Christian, because I think a lot of people think negative emotion is the opposite to positive emotion. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that they lie on different continuums essentially, and we could be potentially full of positive emotion, but also full of negative emotion. Have a typical response in those patterns. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Because they're separate dimensions. You can, in theory, you could be a neurotic extrovert. so you're drawn to the buzz and the thrill of a party, but then after the party, you're like agonizing afterwards about, did I say the wrong thing, or or whatever. Yeah,
or you're deeply hostile.
yeah, exactly.
So obviously the inevitable next question is, how do we come by those traits? You speak to this a bit in the book. Are we born with them, or do we develop them over the course of our early life time experiences? What's the mix there, Christian?
Yeah, so a lot of it is unsurprisingly genetic. So probably about 50% of the difference between people is explained by differences in their genes. But obviously, that does leave plenty of scope for all sorts of other factors to play a role. So life experiences, yeah, parenting. Although interestingly, in childhood and adolescence, the research suggests it's much more our peer group that affects the development of our personality than our parents. And unless, putting aside extreme examples of maltreatment and what have you, in a typical safe, loving family, it's the friends that actually have a bigger shaping role on personality. And then it's the social roles we take on in life. So actually, the jobs, paid jobs, or other social roles we take on, family roles, family responsibilities, all these things shape our traits over time. And yeah, major life experiences, life changes, getting married, getting divorced, bereavement, promotion, unemployment, all these things. Anything that sort of disrupts your routines in life, your lifestyle, and the people you mix with, anything like that is going to have an influence on your personality traits over time.
And obviously, you yourself can have an influence on your own personality, which is a central theme of the book, and which we're going to get onto. Now, I think to the layperson, coming back to this idea of, well, what does this mean, personality? Surely Joe or Karen or Frank or Bill, whoever, surely our friends that we know, they're different in different situations. And my understanding, Christian, is what we're saying in personality with traits is that they are typical responses uh, in terms of how we behave, how we feel, how we think, how we behave on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. But absolutely, different situations will influence how our personality plays out at any given time. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So personality plays out over the long term. So really, to get a truly accurate measure of someone's personality, you would really need to observe them or measure their personality across lots of different situations. And you can see personality really as almost like a distribution profile. So, for example, even the strongest introvert acts extroverted some of the time. So probably, let's say, when they're with their best buddy, they're probably pretty extroverted. But compared with a strong extrovert, the number of occasions in which they act in that extroverted way is lower. So you can kind of see it. You can imagine, if you could monitor someone over weeks or months, you could kind of see, it'd be like a musical amplifier. You can kind of see the 5 traits going up and down across different situations. And personality is that average. You would need to take the average right across all different situations. And another way of looking at it as well is personality is how people behave really without any effort, without thinking about it. It's just it's what comes instinctively to them. So the classic example is that when a strong extrovert walks into a room at a party that's full of people, they don't force themselves, or they don't sort of have to command themselves, right now I'm going to start being friendly, now I'm going to start, I must make an effort to start chatting to people. It's what they do. That's what makes it personality.
What are the situational factors that influence personality?
What are they? Well, it's things like the company you're with, the company you keep, the role that you're playing, mood. Mood is a really strong one. Lots of studies suggest when we're in a good mood, a positive mood, we tend, for example, to act more extroverted when we're in that kind of mood. Tiredness, what we've eaten, what we've had to drink, substances can, in the situation, affect how our personality manifests. And I mean, we might come on to this, but because situation interacts with personality in this way, one thing I argue in the book is that by being more intentional and mindful of the situations we place ourselves in, it's not going to happen overnight, but over the long haul, if you do strategically alter the situations you place yourself in, you can use that as a device to kind of bring out different traits in yourself, in a sense, and it can set up kind of feedback loops. Because if you see yourself acting differently, and especially in a way that you aspire to be, that's obviously very reinforcing and rewarding, and these things can snowball. So your listeners might identify with the idea that they have particular friends with whom they feel a certain way. Some friends might make them feel more conscientious, let's say, more ambitious. They might bring out that side of them, or they might have another friend who's much more idle and doesn't really, isn't very motivated, and they might feel when they're with that friend they sort of take on some of those traits, for example. So again, by being, obviously there are limits to how much we can control these things in life, but arguably by being a bit more strategic about it, if you are frustrated by the way your traits are holding you up in life, then you can use things like that, the company that you keep, and friendships, the ones that help bring out the side of yourself that you aspire to. You can use that to help mold your personality in the ways you want.
I think to speak to that point, Christian, I think this is really pertinent for sports coaches, that the persona they portray to the people they're coaching, their players, can influence. I think you describe it in the book as having an affective presence, as in an emotional presence, almost like an emotional contagion, essentially. And for me, working a lot in the world of football, soccer, I think of, say, Jurgen Klopp as a person. I think it would be, I would say he's probably an extrovert. He would test extroverted with his extraordinarily positive demeanor, his outgoing nature. I've actually been in the stadium working with a team who were playing against Liverpool, and he got very, very angry at one stage. And my understanding is that extroverts do have a propensity to get angry. You can correct me there if I'm wrong. I think there's just been some research on that. So, but I just think that's where, not every coach is an extrovert, but it is really interesting to think of that affective presence, that emotional contagion, as something that might be useful for a coach.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that notion of, what persona do I want to portray in my coaching practice that can positively influence how I coach players, that can positively influence players, is a really useful skill to have. And I call that a skill because, and I think this is what you're laying out in the book, to be able to adapt, to change, to flex your personality, is a skill or a set of competencies or a set of skills that can be useful. Is that the argument for change, Christian? Is that because you can potentially act with a greater sense of competence in the different challenges that you meet in your everyday life?
Oh, yeah. Well, the case for change is, the different traits are associated with different kind of advantages and disadvantages. Similar to affective presence, that you mentioned, which is how it's almost, psychologists have talked about it almost like another personality trait, that we vary in how we make other people feel when we're in their company. So a person who has a sort of positive affective presence makes the people they are with feel better about themselves. So that could be an incredibly empowering, positive attribute to have for a coach. And then a related finding that I thought about was something, I don't know if you remember this one, called the Michelangelo effect, which is, so it's been studied in the context of partners, romantic partners. You can imagine it applying in other situations and contexts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's this idea that when if we're with a partner who has the traits that we aspire to, we are more likely to change in the direction of those traits that we wish to have, and that's for two reasons: because because our partner role models the traits that we're aspiring to, but also because they positively reinforce us when we behave in ways more in the direction of the person we aspire to be. So I mean, I'm speculating now, but I can imagine again in the context of coaching, if the coach can model, the personality attributes that are advantageous, and if they also are mindful to reinforce their clients when they are manifesting their desired traits, then you're going to have a very constructive and positive dynamic going on in that case.
Well said. Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. To be able to change, it's interesting. You lay out three factors that are absolutely crucial to be able to actually shift one's personality traits or characteristics, to become more extroverted if you're introverted, to become more conscientious if you lack in conscientiousness. you talk about, well, look, firstly, you've got to want to change. That's obviously quite important. You've got to believe you
Yeah.
can, and then you've got to be able to persist. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Well, I think the desire to change, is absolutely fundamental. It's going to be nigh on impossible to change. Well, to force change upon someone,
Yeah,
and of course, a person might well change whether they want to or not by force of circumstance. But if we're talking about intentional personality change, I don't know. Yeah, your listeners, I don't know whether they have a client they would like to help change, or just in their personal lives, a friend or a partner that who they would like to change. Could be controversial. Yeah, I mean, if there's resistance on the part of the person, who needs the change, yeah, I mean, I
yeah,
would say it's a non-starter, and you're going
yeah,
to get resistance and what have you. Um, so yeah, desire to change, believing in change. I mean, it's had some bad press. I don't know if you've seen this in recent years. Some bad press. This whole growth mindset concept.
yep, yep. Carol Dweck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it has like lots of these psychological concepts that gather a following and become very popular. It tends to be hyped up, and then you get the backlash, the skepticism. But I've seen so many findings that even if the benefits are modest, it's such a simple um, aim, to help someone appreciate uh, the malleability in their attributes and in their skills, and having that mindset rather than just seeing everything as fixed and God given. Then it's going to be it's helpful in so many ways as a philosophy.
Yes,
When you encounter a difficulty or things don't go as you hoped, whether in sport or in life or whatever it might be. If you diagnose that failure as saying something fundamental and permanent about yourself, I mean that's a terrible. That's going to have a really harmful influence. Whereas if
absolutely.
you can encourage, yeah, if you can encourage someone to have view our skills and attributes as more plastic, then of course a failure then becomes a learning opportunity and so on. So yeah, so that recognizing our ability to change, I think, is key. Um, and then as for persistence, yeah, I mean the whole, it's a message I try and repeat throughout the book is because at the level of personality, we're talking about deep change. It is not going to be easy, and it's not enough to just try, changing your routine for a couple of weeks. It's just not. It's not going to work. You really need to stick with it, and there are lessons from the world of psychotherapy as well. How often people try and give up things like smoking or whatever it might be, or try and change their problematic, if they keep having problematic relationships and things. All these things are hard. They're hard to change, and it's going to take persistence and hard work and dedication. It can be done. Everything I looked into in the research and anecdotal evidence as well suggests with persistence and determination, we can achieve meaningful change. Don't let anyone tell you it's going to be easy or a quick fix, because the thing is, if you take that attitude, then when you trip up and you don't succeed, it's going to be it's going to destroy your morale. So it's better to be realistic, I think, about the need for persistence.
I love those three aspects because I know they sound. And please excuse me here, Christian. I know people might be saying, well, they sound obvious, Well, of course you have to want to change. Of course you've got to believe that you can, and then you've got to persist. But actually, I don't think as humans we necessarily look at those obvious things. Certainly in the world of sport, as a sports psychologist, I've sort of had, when I've been engaged at a club or an organisation or with a team, and a coach has said to me, well, that player over there has to change, he or she has to do this and do that, and well, maybe that person doesn't want to change, and so actually that has repercussions for how we treat that scenario. They might not be aware of what they've got to change, or as I've said, they might not want to change. And so we as a coaching unit together have to prepare that person for change, essentially.
Yeah.
And then the belief, you're quite right. I mean, obviously the work of Carol Dweck has fallen foul of the replicability challenge that's rife in psychology, but her work around narrative and meaning systems and what does this mean to me? If I create meaning around, well, I can't change, then I'm never going to be able to. And again, as a practitioner, psychologist, Christian, I find that sometimes I'll sit down with clients who want to change, but they say, well, but I don't think I can. And I find you've got to tackle that belief system first, essentially. And then the persistence piece is huge because, as you said, it's getting that sweet spot between us saying, well, look, you can change your personality, but it's going to be really tough and it's going to be a long stretch, and we've got to do a lot to help you. And I love the way in the book you've gone deep into as you mentioned, into the research and the literature around these three areas, and uncovered the importance of those three. We've got to cover those three for change to happen, essentially.
Yeah, to sort of lay the groundwork, so to speak. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'd like to come on to your 10 rules for personal reinvention, which is towards the end of the book, but I just think they're brilliant for coaches to listen to. There's one sort of ghost that's hovering over me right now that's thinking of more people are using this term authenticity. But it's about being authentic. It's about, and there's several fairly prominent figures who talk about the importance of being authentic. And so just, I know you speak to this in the book, and it's something I battle with myself. And how do you steer the ship in the book around authenticity and change and the relationship between the two?
Yeah, so it's a question and a challenge, that I certainly sympathize with, and and with myself, because it doesn't seem right sometimes to say to suggest to someone that there's something wrong with them. Like, what happened to self-acceptance, for example. Isn't that a virtue? Isn't it important to be true to ourselves? So yeah, I totally get this as a challenge to the book's premise in a way. But so I got a couple of kind of answers, I suppose, to it. One is I looked into the research on authenticity, like, when do people feel most authentic? And there are some really interesting findings around this. And one is that when they've conducted these kind of experience sampling studies, through a day or multiple days, where they occasionally buzz someone on their phone to ask them how they're feeling. And people feel most authentic when they are behaving in line with their so-called ideal self, the person they aspire to be. They feel less authentic when they're behaving in ways in line with their actual self as it is now. This is in terms of personality traits. So, there is an argument that the person you aspire to be is the real you, in a sense. So that's what those findings suggest. So when you're living up to your ideal self, who you aspire to be, that makes you feel like the real you. And findings from relationships back that up. So people tend to be happier when they're in relationships, romantic relationships, when their partner makes them feel more like their ideal self. They tend to be happier and feel more authentic in those relationships. And then I guess another way of looking at it also that I bring out in the book is, you are actually more than your personality traits. So the real you could argue it's more than your traits. It's your values, your goals, your principles, your aesthetic tastes. There's so much more to you. It's your story. You would have covered some of this with Dan McAdams. Yeah. It's your story. It's more. You're more than your traits. So one point I try and argue in the book is, I'm not saying anyone should change if they don't want to. I'm not saying they're really that, well, with some exceptions there. I'm not saying there are good personalities and bad personalities so much as I'm trying to say, look, if your traits are holding you up, if you feel they are preventing you from achieving what you want, to living life according to the values that matter to you, here are some ways you can adapt your traits in the service of those values and goals, and that's being authentic. That's not being fake.
Well said. Yeah, no, I think certainly the notion of authentic to one's ideal self, I'd never really considered that, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. And on the basis of looking towards shifting, flexing, being adaptable with your traits, let's get on to your 10 rules for personal reinvention. And this is essentially the final chapter in the book, and brings together probably a lot of the research and your own thoughts and practical ideas on people changing, people shifting. And I think before we get on to this, I don't know if you'll have sort of, this would resonate with you, Christian. It would be interesting to get your thoughts on this. I did kind of want to say something here and almost speak to the audience, and say that I personally think personality and knowledge of personality, the traits, and a knowledge of personality change is can be important for coaches and for players around character development, around behaviour management. I think players will want to look to develop their character in order to optimize their ability to progress and perform in their sport. I think coaches will want to look to find ways to help their players develop their character and to help them manage unhelpful behaviors. So I think what we're about to talk about, what we've spoken about, what we're about to talk about is really important. And, I before we came on air, Christian, I wrote some things down that players might want to consider shifting, flexing, changing, being a better teammate, to me related to agreeableness potentially, the ability to execute tasks like sets in the gym, for instance, completing your sets. That's conscientiousness. Being on time, conscientiousness, being more relaxed and less worried about your form and who's in the team if it's not you. That's neuroticism, right? Yeah. Being more open to ideas to improve, openness. Potentially being more coachable, agreeableness, speaking up for yourself, or being more socially confident. I think that's potentially a combination between neuroticism and extroversion. Being more vocal at the right times, extroversion, experiencing greater empathy, agreeableness. And for coaches, just briefly, organization, that's conscientiousness, managing your temperament better, neuroticism, being more or less curious, openness, showing greater patience, it's agreeableness, experiencing and expressing positive emotion, being warmer, extroversion, and also agreeableness, being more creative, openness. Plenty there, Christian. I don't know if you've got any comment there, but that's kind of in a nutshell the kind of things I think coaches and players might want to look to adapt in themselves, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely useful framework for all different contexts in life, really, because it distills out, the big five distills out a lot of the redundancy, in how we think about behavior and think about each other. And so, yeah, essentially that's what it is. It's a very useful, practical framework. And yeah, and I think in sport as well, as it might be interesting as well in terms of fitness to think about the interactions between physical health and the big five. Maybe that comes into it as well. There is, personality gets beneath the skin, and there's probably this sort of bi-directional relationship between the big five and physical health. So it's another, in some ways, you can see another incentive for fitness work is actually it can have positive consequences for the person, for your personality traits, and vice versa. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just briefly, what you've outlined there really excites me, because that's a message I try to push is, look, if nothing else, this can act as a, you use the word framework, even if it's a structure, a framework to have, for us as coaches, to have conversations, better, more informed conversations about the people we are coaching, the people we work with. We can't absolutely say, well, this person is at this end of the scale with agreeableness, and it's like this. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, it just helps us have a better conversation. Um, we can potentially lay the ground work for helping people develop themselves. Let's get on to your 10 rules for personal reinvention. I love these 10 rules. I'll just say them, and perhaps you can just unpack them a little bit to finish us off today. So, number one, successful change is more likely to happen if it's for a larger purpose.
Yeah, well, this sort of goes back to what I was saying just now about how you're more than your traits, and I think, yeah, all the evidence suggests really you're more likely to be successful if changing your traits is a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Whether that is to be a better athlete or better father or mother or whatever it might be. And so it pays to spend some time thinking about what really matters to you in life and what you're really trying to achieve. Maybe do that groundwork first and then look to see how you could potentially adapt your traits or enhance your traits in the service of what you're trying to achieve in life.
Number two, you won't improve unless you appraise yourself honestly.
Yeah. So there's a suggest. Yeah, the research suggests we all have uh, certain blind spots, shall we
Yeah.
say? So yeah, if you are genuine about wanting to enhance your personality traits or better yourself, become the best version of yourself that you can be. Um, it does pay to start off with an honest appraisal. After all, if you don't recognize any faults that you have, you're not going to be able to fix them. So as well as filling out rating your own personality traits, it might be beneficial to ask a term I like for it. I think it's from uh, Tasha Eurich. I think is a loving critic.
Yes.
Like maybe go out for a dinner of truth. Dinner of truth, I think she calls it, with a loving critic. Is there anything about you that they would change, to your benefit as much as their own, or this kind of thing. So there are yeah, start with honest appraisal, and then you'll know what needs work.
Well, it makes me think of the idea of a critical friend,
Yeah,
which, as a psychologist, you have during, let's say, supervision, or perhaps you should have throughout the course of your working life. But I do sometimes wonder in the coaching world if lots of coaches will have critical friends, essentially, but around domain specific knowledge. Oh, I think you should have been doing this in your activity, and it's something to do with the sport itself. I think an interesting idea for coaches is to think of a critical friend around personality, essentially, or around the
yeah,
softer skills. So I think that's interesting. Number three, real change begins with action.
yeah. So if you're not prepared to do anything differently, you're not going to achieve personality change. If anything, there was a study came out that found people who had desires to change their traits, but who didn't change their behavior or habits or routines in any way, they actually experienced a kind of backlash. They almost regressed, if you like, maybe out of frustration. So, yeah, the more ambitious you are about change, the more realistic you've got to be about how much you're going to disrupt, self-disrupt, if you like, how much you're going to mix things up, start doing things differently.
Which isn't easy to do, I suppose, somewhat paradoxically, if you're introverted and you're trying to be an extrovert, because obviously being an extrovert, that's part of taking action, is being an extrovert. So you've got to really push yourself.
Yeah, I mean, as I argue in the book that in that case, I think it pays to sort of start with moderate
Yeah.
goals. It could be just being a little bit more outgoing with the cashier in the grocery store or something
Yeah.
like that. Have very specific, smart goals are specific. So make it
Yeah.
specific, make it modest, yeah, and then build up. You kind of, if you can see it in terms of sort of gradually recalibrating.
Absolutely, yeah. Goal setting is key there. Number 4, initiating change is easy. Sticking with it is the hard part.
Yeah, because as we mentioned earlier, we're talking about personality here. So
Yeah,
to achieve lasting personality change, you really got to inculcate these changes, make them absorb them into your habits and deeply into your repertoire, so that it's not an effort anymore. And obviously, that is going to take time. So there's a whole literature around habit change, and I think that is very important for lasting personality change. Um, I mean, just to mention one thing, if you have certain unhelpful habits that bring out poorer side of your personality, you can do something like think about, well, what is the purpose of that? What need am I currently fulfilling with that habit that I wish to change, and switch it. Don't just try and cancel that bad habit uh, and leave a void. Think what is the need that bad habit is serving, and then find a healthier one that brings out a preferable side to your personality.
absolutely. Number 5, change is an ongoing process and you need to keep track of it.
Yes, so there's a phenomenon actually psychologists call the ostrich effect, which is many people's instinct is to, when they're trying to achieve goals or whatever it might be, is to stick their heads in the sand and not monitor how they're getting on. And
Mm.
you need to do that. You need to know whether the changes you're attempting are working. They could be backfiring. You could be uh, you never know, because you need to try out what works for you, and it might take some trial and error. And if you're not sort of monitoring your progress in any way, you won't know. And I think it's also important as well to sort of try and keep abreast of change when you're working on something as profound as personality, because of course working on one aspect of your personality could have knock-on consequences for another. um,
Mm.
Personally, I know, like, I spent some time trying to be more conscientious when I was writing this book, and I realized I was almost becoming a bit obsessive about it, which is more, anxious about it. So I was maybe ramping up my neuroticism. So I think it's worth keeping track of these different things.
And I love that, because immediately I come back, when you're saying that, come back to, it's great to have a framework to your behavior. I mean, maybe you don't want to be too neurotic about having a framework and track
Yeah,
every single step that you make,
yeah,
but I can personally, and I just wonder, if again this comes back to personality, it's if it suits my personality to go, hey, having a structure here, having a framework is great, because I know that helps me to affect change. And it resonates with me that you crank up conscientiousness, which in turn cranks up neuroticism, and you just got to be careful there, haven't you? But I love my favorite fact from that little bit is that Benjamin Franklin
yeah,
kept a record of his attempts to incorporate 13 virtues, and it
yeah,
sounded like he did that every single day. He took notes every day.
yeah. That might be a little bit over the top.
I definitely think neuroticism cranked up there.
Yeah.
Number 6, you need to be realistic about the amount of change possible.
Yeah, so as I've mentioned, yeah, change is hard, and if everything around you stays the same, if you keep your routine the same, your lifestyle the same friends, same job, you know, it's going to be very, very hard for you to change your personality traits in that kind of, if all around you is the same. And there's nothing worse than having, inflated goals, unrealistic goals, because obviously
Mm.
you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and you could end up in a worse place than you were at the beginning. So it's worth pausing, near the start of this plan, if you have one, to improve your personality. It's worth pausing, thinking, how far are you willing to go? Um, but on a positive side, I would say, you don't need to achieve some kind of radical transformation to enjoy benefits. It doesn't have to be like some kind of crazy total character change. You can just, by enhancing, one or two traits, could make a big difference to your life, because these things can snowball. Even if you just increase your extroversion, let's say, by a small amount. You don't have to become the life and soul of every party you go to, but just increase your willingness to take risks, your willingness to maybe chat with someone, a stranger, to network a little bit more. It could take your career in a new direction. Anything, all these things. It doesn't take much to have, one of those kind of, if you remember that movie, sliding door moment, where,
Hmm.
so that's how I like to see it. Is just, even if you have modest ambitions for your personality change, it could be beneficial.
Number 7, you're more likely to succeed with the help of others. I think this is absolutely crucial,
It
isn't it?
is, yeah. It goes back a little bit to what we were saying earlier about the importance of those relationship dynamics. If you're surrounded by people who don't support what you're trying to achieve, it's going to be very undermining. You're going to be swimming against the tide. It's so much easier if other people recognize what and agree and support what you're trying to achieve, and just having people on board. For example, I don't know, if you're beginning a new exercise routine, to do it with someone, can be so much more
Yeah.
rewarding. You can hold each other to account, and so on. Yeah. So there are all sorts of ways the social side is so crucial.
An accountability partner.
Yeah.
And in my own work, Christian, I think shared mental models are certainly in sports, in team sports, are so important for teaming.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And this next one, number 8, 3 more to go here. I just think is so relevant for sports, the sporting landscape. Life will get in the way. The trick is to anticipate and roll with it. So kind of life gets in the way and will disrupt the change process, I suppose.
Exactly. It's inevitable. And when I was writing, I wrote this book before the pandemic, but perfect example. You're trying to make all the, you're busy,
Yeah.
working hard at these little changes to your life, and so on and so forth. And then bam, something huge, crashes over like a wave. And it's going to happen in different ways in life, whether it's a pandemic or something more, sort of local and personal. And so, I guess I'm partly just mentioning this one out of humility. That, be kind to yourself about what you can, about what you can achieve with psychological interventions and so on. Every now and again, there are going to be setbacks, and it's going to happen to all of us. And the best thing you can do is really just know that that's going to happen. Build your resilience in the good times. Build up your um, psychological strategies that you have. Build up your social support, your relationships. When the times are good, and then at least then, hopefully you can ride the wave when it comes.
And these, I mean, you've always kind of preempted the last couple here. Self kindness is more likely to lead to lasting change than beating yourself up. So self kindness is crucial. I think that's something that we forget. We think if we're trying to change and we make a mistake, we have a setback, then we want to beat ourselves up. And then the final one, believing in the potential for. And actually, no, let's just go with, can we go with the 9th one, the self kindness one? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess, and this is very relevant to sport. One of the things I mentioned there in this sort of arena of psychology called self-compassion is the difference between a healthy perfectionist and an unhealthy perfectionist. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're doing yourself no favors if you're kind of an unhealthy perfectionist. You interpret every failure as saying something profound about you. Um, and it means if you're an unhealthy perfectionist, you're trying to achieve more for other people. You see every challenge as some kind of diagnosis of your skills rather than a learning opportunity. And then if we flip all that around, like a healthy perfectionist has so-called, and I'm sure you know this in sports psychology, like mastery goals. It's not, yeah, it's not about winning every time or getting the best score every time, but it's more of a reveling in the process of learning and developing. And even when things go badly, of course, some of the best opportunities come when things go badly, and it's being kind to yourself in the sense of, well, when you lost, or when things didn't go so well, not just pinning all the blame on yourself, but like looking at what were the extraneous factors. What happened before, like in the case of sport, what was your preparation like? What were the what happened on the day? What did your opponent do that maybe they threw you a curveball and it ruined all your plans, but you can learn from that. So yeah, it's kind of zooming out and recognizing all this kind of situational factors rather than just blaming yourself.
And just to reflect back to your mastery goals, I think I think that as a sports psychologist, life is one long broken record around mastery. Stick to mastery, stick to your tasks, stick to the process, and getting people away from ego. And just a note on some of the things you said there made me think of Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy, and especially the sort of the unconditional self-acceptance that there will be mistakes, and perhaps it's unfortunate or bad that you've slipped up and you've slept in or whatever it is you've done, and you're trying to wake up early every day, but it's not the end of the world. So that self-acceptance, the non-authalizing beliefs, I think that kind of linguistic process comes into this here.
Yeah, I mean, we're all human, aren't we? At the end of the day, we've all got these weaknesses. We're all going to slip up, and it's what's important is how you respond to those slip ups.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you dust yourself down, get back on track? Rather than just beating yourself up and sort of dissolving into self-criticism and so on.
Last but not least, to finish things off for this today, it's number 10. Believing in the potential for personality change is a philosophy to live by.
Yeah, what I was getting at with this is really that we can't think it's a case of sort of ticking off a box, job done. Because after all, recognizing that personality is malleable to a degree means, let's say you achieve the personality changes you're after, they're not necessarily then going to be fixed. So that's why you got to recognize you might regress, you might slip back, you might different aspects of your character that you don't like so much might start to come out again, but don't worry, it's, as I say, it's an ongoing process. That's why it is more akin to a philosophy rather than a kind of a task to be done.
Well, Christian, that's just absolutely fascinating stuff. I think that those 10 ideas are so practical for personality and behavior change. I think they're a great template for coaches to utilize. And just this book is absolutely fantastic. It's just full of the latest research, broken down really simply. We have a saying in coaching that it's so important to know your players. You've got to get to know your players. And I think this is the kind of book that can help coaches to be more considered about that, to look a little bit more deeply into who their players might be, and why they are as they are, and how they can help players with the change process. With that in mind, firstly, where can people get hold of a book? And secondly, how can they follow you? Are you on social media?
Well, thanks, Dan, for your kind words about the book. And it's on Amazon. It's at Waterstones. Hopefully, it's at the rare independent bookshops now, I hope.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm on Twitter mainly. I'm at psych_writer on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm on Facebook, but I don't really use it that much. Only for plugging the book. If I'm honest. And I have a website, christianjarrett.com. And yeah, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity today.
No, well, thank you so much. It's just such a great read, and it's great to catch up about this. It's an area I'm really fascinated with. So thanks so much, Christian.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. If you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.